We all like to think of ourselves as these rational beings, right? Carefully weighing the pros and cons before we make any big choice. But what if I told you that most of the time, that's just a story we tell ourselves? What if the real puppet master pulling the strings is our emotion, and our heart decides way before our head even gets a chance to catch up? No, really, just take a second here. Think about it. Was it picking a new job, buying a house, even something as simple as deciding who to trust? You probably did all your homework and came to what felt like a super logical conclusion. But if you're really honest with yourself, didn't you have a gut feeling about it right from the start? Okay, let's dive into the science of this because it's pretty mind-blowing. According to a ton of research, a staggering 95% of our decisions are not driven by logic. Nope, they're shaped subconsciously by our emotional brain. That neat little list of pros and cons you made, a lot of the time, that comes after you've already made the choice. It's just a justification for a decision your gut made in a split second.
So, if it's not all logic, what is really going on up there in our heads? Well, it turns out our brain is running on two very different operating systems. Think of it as a constant internal tug of war. We can call them System 1 and System 2.
Okay, so System 1 is our fast, automatic, emotional brain. This is where our gut feelings and snap judgments come from. Now, in contrast, you've got System 2. That's our slow, deliberate, logical brain. It handles the heavy lifting like complex math and conscious reasoning. But here's the crucial difference. System 1 is always on, running in the background. System 2, though, you have to deliberately fire it up. And honestly, it gets tired pretty easily. At the very heart of System 1 is this little guy, the amygdala. The best way to think of it is as the brain's hypervigilant first responder. It is constantly scanning your environment for threats and rewards, and it reacts in milliseconds, long before the conscious thinking parts of your brain even know what's happening. You know that jolt of adrenaline you feel when a car suddenly swerves in front of you? Yep, that's your amygdala. And then, representing System 2, we have the prefrontal cortex. This is the brain's CEO. It's in charge of the big picture stuff, strategic planning, weighing long-term consequences, and keeping impulsive behavior in check. But here's the catch. It's way slower than the amygdala. So while that first responder is already screaming and pulling the fire alarm, the CEO is just getting the memo. So how does the super fast emotional system actually guide us? It's not just about freaking out when there's danger. It actively shapes our everyday choices through these gut feelings, which are basically powerful mental shortcuts. Let's take a look at how that actually works. Now, the fancy scientific name for this is the affect heuristic, but really it's a super simple idea. How you feel about something directly influences what you think about it. So if an idea makes you feel all warm and fuzzy, you're probably going to see it as beneficial and low risk. But if it gives you that little feeling of dread in your stomach, you'll see it as risky and not worth your time, no matter what the actual data says. And this isn't just some weird quirk of our brains. It's absolutely essential to how we function. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio famously studied people who had damage to the emotional centers of their brains. And what he found was incredible. They could analyze problems logically, perfectly even, but they couldn't make a decision to save their lives. They would just endlessly debate what to eat for lunch because they had no emotional preference, no gut feeling to just nudge them one way or the other. Let me show you this in action with this brilliant study. Researchers gave one group of people a really simple 2-digit number to remember, but then they gave a second group a much harder 7-digit number. Then, as both groups were walking to another room, they were offered a choice of a snack, a rich, decadent piece of chocolate cake or a healthy, sensible fruit salad. And the results were just fascinating. The group with the easy task, whose logical brain, the CEO, had plenty of bandwidth, they only chose the cake about 41% of the time. But the group who was struggling to remember those 7 digits, their logical brain was completely tied up. And with the CEO distracted, the emotional first responder took over, and a whopping 63% of them went straight for the chocolate cake. So this really shows how easily our emotional brain can just take the wheel. But what happens when that emotional response isn't just a gentle nudge towards some cake, but an overwhelming, out-of-control explosion that is completely out of proportion to what's actually happening? This is what the psychologist Daniel Goleman calls an amygdala hijack. It's when that emotional first responder doesn't just get a vote, it stages a full-on hostile takeover. It completely bypasses the rational brain and triggers a massive fight-or-flight response. You know that moment when you snap at someone you care about or send that angry email you immediately regret? That's amygdala hijacked. The CEO has been locked out of the building.
So, how do we stop these hijacks? How do we give our brain's CEO a chance to get back in the room and take control? Well, the solution isn't some complex technique. It's actually incredibly simple but profound. It all lies in the power of the pause. The psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl put it perfectly. That space, that tiny little moment between what happens to us and how we react to it, that space is everything. And learning to find it and even widen it is the absolute key to emotional intelligence.
That space is where we get to make a crucial choice. Are we going to react or are we going to respond? See, a reaction is pure amygdala. It's instant, it's impulsive, it's total autopilot. But a response comes from the prefrontal cortex. It's considered, it's deliberate, it's a mindful choice. It's the difference between lashing out and just taking a deep breath.
So how do you actually create that space in the heat of the moment? It's really a four-step process. First, just notice the physical feelings of the emotion. Is your heart racing? Is your chest getting tight? Second, take one single conscious breath. That's the pause. That's how you create the space. Third, ask yourself a simple question. Why am I feeling this way? This is what engages your logical brain. And then finally, you get to choose how you want to respond.
That simple pause is a total neurological game changer. It breaks the instantaneous circuit of that amygdala hijack, and it buys you precious time. It gives your slower, more thoughtful prefrontal cortex, the CEO, a chance to get back online, to rationally assess the situation, and to steer you towards a much better decision. At the end of the day, understanding this whole process isn't about getting rid of emotion from our decisions. That would be impossible and, honestly, a terrible idea. It's all about developing self-awareness. It's about recognizing that initial emotional spark not as a command, but as a really important piece of data. So the next time you get a really strong gut feeling, just for a second, pause and ask yourself, what is this feeling really trying to tell me?